Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anarita Bashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any question for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. A quick greetings. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you very much, Anara. Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy Hanukkah and coming New Year 2025. We greet everyone from West Virginia, and I'm honored to have back a year after she was with us, a great friend of our program, Nina Gade, who joined us from Denmark. And she is a great person. She is an activist, a poet, originally from Russia, but firmly on the side of the Ukrainian victory. Nina, talk to us about what is going on Danish soil. We are eager to see that the support for Ukraine doesn't wane in Europe in wake of everything that we have seen in this couple of years. And we all hope that 2025 will be the year of victory. This is our last podcast in 2024, and we are honored again to have Gade here with us. Please, Nina.
Thank you very much, dear friends. I feel deep gratitude feeling that I was invited one more time. And it's still very important to continue to update the chronicle of this horrible war in Ukraine and talk about how people's destinies are reflected in the black mirror of this huge European tragedy. I will again and again thank the whole team of people who, without pauses, for almost 3 years now, has continued to organize those online meetings. Likewise, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who continues to inform the world in all forms of information about the horrible war in Ukraine, what is being done in this regard, and what assistance is being provided to Ukraine and Ukrainians, and inside and outside the country, and what still needs to be done and delivered. The war continues, although we hope a lot that it will stop snad, but still we need to remind the world of its victims. 1 year has passed since my last report. Life goes on, also for Ukrainians in Denmark, and their lives are getting more colors in connection with realities in the Danish society and conditions related to the need to navigate through difficult challenges in the Danish cultural and mental environment, in learning the Danish language, and for many also getting a grip on the labor market. Life in Denmark is now more familiar to many Ukrainians, and for several of them, living conditions have improved over the past year in some respect. But in general, life for Ukrainians in Denmark is still full of difficulties, contradictions, worries, and ongoing tough considerations on how to make ends meet in daily life and how to proceed with life in general. Based on those overall reflections, my updated report today can be titled Ukrainians in Denmark, two sides of immigration. I will start by mentioning that I continue to work a lot with Ukrainians in Denmark, but now mostly as a teacher in Danish language and as a translator in different social and medical spheres.
Nina, your mic went off.
We don't hear you.
Click on the mic icon on the top right of your screen.
Is it better now?
There you
Oh
go.
my God.
Yes, that's good. Sometimes
Okay,
things
but
like
I
that
didn't.
happen.
I didn't press. Oh,
Yeah.
but I don't know from what from what place I can continue.
We're good.
But I
Thank
started
you.
to talk about that I continue to work with a lot of Ukrainians in Denmark, but now mostly like a teacher in Danish language and as a translator in different social and medical spheres. And I mentioned already that my students in the School of Danish are mainly women, Ukrainian women in different ages, from 18 to 75. But I also teach Danish to a few Ukrainian men, mostly older ones, but not only them, because there are still some men in the pre-retirement age who got the permission to leave Ukraine for personal reasons. Like, for example, having many children, having been hard wounded, having serious illness, or the like. I will, in a while, tell more about my work at the School of Danish. But now let me just look a little bit back. 1 year ago, I described in many details how Denmark, like many other European countries, in urgent and practical terms, started to help Ukraine and Ukrainians in the war against Russia. According to the Kiel Institute for World Economy, Denmark ranks second in the world regarding total government bilateral aid and percentage of GDP, totaling a bit above 2% of GDP. This is really impressive, after my opinion. That covers humanitarian, financial, and military allocations. Only Estonia has given more. Estonia has given more in percentage of GDP. Especially also in the domain of military assistance, Danish government bilateral aid in percentage of GDP also ranks second in the world. By the way, Europe as a whole has given Ukraine far more assistance than USA. I need to say that. European government allocations total nearly 125 billion euros since the start of the full-scale invasion, while the USA has provided about 88 billion euros, most of which is military aid. Coming back to affairs in Denmark, I reflected on already last year that Denmark early on also opened doors for many Ukrainians who escaped from the war. During almost 3 years since Putin's full-scale war started, more than 46,000 Ukrainians have received temporary protection in Denmark. That amount to 0.8 of the population in Denmark before the war. For comparison, that would amount to 2.7 million refugees receiving protection in USA in the same period. Needless to say, it was a large challenge for Denmark to accommodate that many Ukrainians without much preparation. When the war began, many places for temporary residence for Ukrainians were opened all over Denmark. I mentioned that before, but it's interesting to continue this subject. This in itself was not easy task because Denmark is a small country, like you know, of course. A lot of buildings were rebuilt into temporary residence centers for Ukrainians, and many still live there. However, during the last year, many Ukrainians moved from such centers to different social flats, and their living conditions have improved for that reason. Also, about 14,000 Ukrainians found job in Denmark. Many Ukrainian children go to Danish kindergarten and schools. It has naturally become easier to establish such conditions because now much fewer Ukrainians arrive in Denmark compared to 2022 and 23. But still, the integration of Ukrainians in Danish society is not really progressing. And I will dwell on that in a moment. Let me by now inform you of the fact that some of the Ukrainians who came to Denmark during last 3 years have taken the decision to leave Denmark and return to Ukraine or to move elsewhere. Statistics shows that almost every fifth Ukrainian who arrived to Denmark after the beginning of the war left the country again, and that is approximately 11,000 people. There are several explanations for that. According to the non-profit and non-government organization, the Danish Refugee Council, a lot is probably rooted in a feeling of uncertainty. As I referred to earlier, the Ukrainians have only received a temporary residence permit, which recently was prolonged to spring 2026 now. But after that, no one is sure for the time being. That is why some Ukrainians have returned to Ukraine or moved to other countries. However, referring to a survey from the University of Copenhagen, 6 out of 10 displaced Ukrainians want to stay in Denmark, even after the end of the war. It's interesting statistics, I think. But better understanding of the missing motivation for a part of Ukrainians to stay in Denmark, for better understanding, I would like to refer to some historical and political facts. For those who maybe don't know Denmark so well from different sides, Denmark is a quite special country in Europe, which for last 25 years has implemented some of the most restrictive legislation regarding foreigners in general and refugees in particular. In 2001, a new center-right government took over in Denmark, supported by a large right-wing anti-foreigners party, which generally supported the government in all domains as long as more and more strict law regarding foreigners were carried out. Later, the main opposition party, the Social Democrats, came into power and was also skeptic towards foreigners. When Russia attacked Ukraine and the war started, then something surprising happened for Denmark. I think it's really surprising, but Denmark immediately opened doors for Ukrainians seeking protection. Even the anti-foreigners party kept low profile, while thousands of Ukrainians poured in and temporary residence centers were opened across the country. However, to use a Danish expression, the trees didn't grow up to the sky. And be aware that in Danish and English, word sky and heaven is the same word. So to put it in another way, the Ukrainians received security, food, shelter, medical care, social services, and many of them got jobs, but they didn't go to heaven. All Ukrainians still only have a temporary residence permit based on a Ukrainian special law, which was quickly adopted back in early 2022. Ukrainians have not yet obtained the right to seek permanent asylum. In reality, Ukrainians in Denmark don't have the official status as refugees. They are officially called temporary displaced persons with a limited residence permit in Denmark. That temporary residence permit for Ukrainians has been prolonged once a year and was recently one more time extended until March 2026. But what will happen next? How will the legal basis for staying in Denmark work and look for Ukrainians in the future? Can they stay permanent in the country if they want to stay or not? Let's come back to Hamlet. To be or not to be in Denmark in the long term. This is the main Hamlet's question for all Ukrainians in Denmark. People don't like uncertainty, especially people with a lot of traumatic experiences. For many Ukrainians who came from the most affected and damaged territories, in reality, there is no way back because their houses and flats are destroyed. And besides, some of those territories are annexed by Russia. The main question is how Denmark will look on different Ukrainians' cases after the war. Who will get the permission to stay permanently in the country? Who will be sent back? What kind of criteria will work? There are no clear answer on that currently. I often talk to Ukrainians, and this uncertainty worries them a lot. Is it worth to put down roots in the Danish society or not? Is it worth to learn a difficult Danish language or not if life in Denmark is temporary? Ukrainians have already not enough motivation to integrate into the Danish society. So that is why they typically create their own communities in Denmark. Like, for example, Association of Ukrainians in Denmark, which has the connection with some political organizations and the Danish Refugees Council. But in general, Ukrainians live in their own world and behind a sort of fence in Denmark and don't really understand the mentality of Danes and the rules in the society. It's really sad, but it's like it is. There is a sort of invisible petition between the Ukrainians and the Danish society. Politicians and others talk a lot about integration of foreigners in Denmark, but the necessary mechanisms to allow people from other countries to be the equal and valuable part of the society are not really in place for Ukrainians. It doesn't mean, of course, that Danes don't feel for Ukrainians and their situation, but one sad aspect is that Danes simply don't have an opportunity to communicate with Ukrainians. Only few Ukrainians speak English, and maybe a little bit English, and as I said, they have a lot of difficulties to learn Danish, which is regarded by some as one of the most difficult languages in the world. Especially Danish pronunciation is difficult for most non-Scandinavian people. At least older people from Ukraine have no chance to learn Danish as a level sufficient for good communication with Danes. And in this connection, I would like, as Danish teacher, to share my own reflections and considerations regarding this system of learning Danish here in the country. It will probably sound somewhat strange for my listeners, but it is forbidden for me to explain the difficulties of Danish language to my Ukrainian students in Ukraine. During almost 3 years of my work with Ukrainians, I have advanced in the Ukrainian language, but I cannot use this possibility officially, like in effective teaching resource. My Ukrainian language skills are in reality a disadvantage in School of Danish. I think it's completely crazy, but it is like that. The main rule is Danish language should be taught only in Danish. This is the policy of teaching Danish in Denmark, and there can't be exceptions from this rule. I can see some reasons in it concerning young people with fresh brain, But that way of learning Danish really stress a lot of older people and traumatized people. I consider myself to be a quite unique Ukrainian speaking teacher who has the qualifications and the skills to make it all much easier for Ukrainian students, but I can't be free in using my students' native language. I can only use Ukrainian at school in a secret way, in an underground way, so to say. Thanks to that disobedience, I have the best results in model testing at school among my colleagues, and this is great. But I wonder why the authorities in Denmark don't try to attract more Ukrainian-speaking teachers to the language learning process. Why is it impossible to be more flexible in this connection and use individual criteria in methods of learning Danish? Unfortunately, I cannot decide anything regarding the learning process, but I can use my working place, like the platform, for helping Ukrainians with a wide palette of social help. In reality, the big part of my activity in School of Danish is my volunteer work, parallel to my teaching hours. I help my students in translating the official letters from the authorities, communicate with the doctors, book the time for examinations, medical examinations, and help with understanding their bills sometimes, write requests to municipalities, and so on. And I feel really good that maybe it is only one drop of help to Ukraine, but like we talked last time about it, that every drop of attention and help is important. The ocean consists of drops. To make some positive changes in life of few people is also a big good result, and I do my best in this direction. I have to mention again that I continue to feel the tragic background in my work with Ukrainians. War is very close to them and very close to me. I can feel its fire breath. Many broken human destinies have passed before me and are still in front of me. I have already heard a lot of tragic stories and descriptions from people who came from different Ukrainian districts, and the tragic events continue. Some weeks ago, it was a woman, Ukrainian woman, Svetlana. She's around 60 years old. She came to me and told that her son-in-law was killed in this war, and her daughter went to Ukraine to participate in the funeral, while Svetlana had to take care of 3 small grandchildren, and she asked me not to register her absence in the school, because all this kind of information is directly conveyed to the municipalities, who send the student a big fine for every day of absence. The necessity of learning Danish as well as working in different places is the part of integration contract, which Ukrainians have to sign if they want to get financial help from the public authorities. I know that several women in my class have sons in the war. I mentioned about it last time, but it's still in this way. And they smile those days when they managed to talk with their sons, and they look sad and worried when they were not able to contact them. I really feel this atmosphere in class. I also need to be very careful in different subjects in educational process. It's not good to use subjects concerning family, children, homeland, childhood, plans for future, that I use a lot with students from other countries. I also learn Danish, other students from other countries. Ukrainians are very sensitive to such subjects and can be very upset. Suddenly just start to cry, and it's really sad. Many of my students, like I mentioned before, are psychologically traumatized, and I'm not a psychologist, but I consider my job to be the part of it, because it's not only teaching is important for me at class, it's also so important to create the good atmosphere and to come with some encouraging words to Ukrainians. It gives me a lot of satisfaction, and I really have a good time with my students. I'm happy that my communication with Ukrainians at school is informal. I will mention that some time ago, me and my husband Tony went on a short trip to Sweden with my Ukrainian students, and we sailed with a ferry from Elsinore, from the castle of Hamlet, where the school is situated, not in the castle, of course, but in Elsinore, to the Swedish town Helsingborg, which is less than half an hour by ferry across the strait that divides Denmark and Sweden. The idea was to give my students a really nice travel experience, but it was suddenly more than that, because we met in the center of Helsingborg an anti-war demonstration in support of Ukraine. It was so unpredictable. It was so great. It was a clear sign that Ukraine is not forgotten in Sweden as well. And we got to know that people participate in such demonstrations every week in Helsingborg, just a little town of Sweden, reminding that the war continues and Ukrainians need help and support. By the way, there are still a lot of Ukrainian flags all over Denmark and Sweden, and this is also an important symbol for cooperation with Ukraine. My students exchanged important contacts, informations with Ukrainian activists in Helsingborg. It's always good to extend the geography of useful contacts. Ukrainians try to live a new life in Denmark and in other European countries as well, but all their feelings and thoughts are still with their homeland. They follow the news and talk a lot about Ukraine's future. I would like to mention one touching episode from my class. I have a student, his name is Maxim, and he became disabled after his house in a village close to Donetsk was shelled, and now his wife takes him to school in a wheelchair. And he said to me that he needs to be strong and recover because his highest, strongest wish is to rebuild Ukraine after the war. That's really touching. Ukrainians try not to lose fortitude and spiritual strength, and I got to know Ukrainian people like very strong people who actually don't complain too much. They can feel a lot of very sad feelings in the heart, but they don't show it so often. But of course, it's like knife inside the heart all the time. But I can clearly see that even after war finished, and it will finish one day, stop one day, it will still continue in people's hearts and souls for generations to come. The consequences of the war are horrible for thousands, millions of Ukrainians. Even for them who moved temporarily or permanently to a new peaceful country, it is really very difficult to start a new life in a foreign country, in a new cultural and linguistic environment. Danish psychologists still work with Ukrainians, but the waiting time to get such treatment is very, very long. And there are not enough translators who can Danish and Ukrainian. People from Danish public authorities, volunteers, doctors, staff in kindergartens and schools communicate with Ukrainians mainly by Google Translate, and we know it can be a lot of mistakes and wrong information. It's not good enough. And this is why I also got more work as a translator. And thanks to that, I have a clear picture of how Ukrainians live in Denmark, what are their problems and difficulties and challenges here in the country, and what the Danish authorities require from Ukrainian, and why it is sometimes really hard and psychologically difficult for people from Ukraine to follow all those expectations. First of all, it's difficult for all the people. In addition to financial help, Ukrainians in Denmark have many responsibilities and duties. Like I mentioned before, people are not only expected, but required to look for a job and learn the Danish language. I don't know how it functions in other countries, but hard working conditions for Ukrainians here in Denmark sometimes, in my opinion, cross the red line. I translate a lot, just for example, for Ukrainian women at the age after 55, maybe 60, who are sent to work in hotels, supermarkets, warehouses, fabrics, and have more or less destroyed their health because of that kind of work. Many of them started to have problems with the back, neck, knees, and the like. Many of those high educated women have never worked physically, and it is somehow too late to start. But they cannot say no to such kind of jobs. They are afraid to complain, to lose their money. This help from the financial help from the authorities. Besides, they don't have language to describe their health problems for the municipalities and also for the employer. And I often call to all these kind of places and become the voice of Ukrainians who need to change maybe the place of hard work because of the medical problems. And I have already some success stories in this connection. I'm really a little bit proud of this because, as I said, just some help, one drop of help is also big help. To sum it up, I will say that I can clearly see that individual approach to every single Ukrainian is missing here in Denmark. In my opinion, it is not good to put everyone, let me put it in this way, in shackles of common rules, especially people with psychological problems and older people. It could be a lot of things that people need this individual approach. The common legislation in Denmark says that men and women only have the right to pension in the late 60s, 67, 68. Yes, a little bit crazy, but I don't know how it is in USA, but I think it's a little bit too late in Denmark. But anyhow, it is difficult to explain a social worker in Danish municipalities that life in Denmark can hardly be compared with life in Ukraine, and a 65 years old woman in Denmark is not the same like Ukrainian woman at the same age. The big problem regarding unskilled work for Ukrainians exists, of course, not only for older people. Many young and middle-aged people are also affected by those challenges. And as I mentioned before, although about the 14,000 Ukrainians, they now are replenished to the Danish labor market, but it's not their dream job, not at all. It is a bit easier for Ukrainian men who are used to physical labor in Ukraine to get some kind of jobs or in fabrics and in the sector of construction, maybe in transport, but it is really hard for women who never tried such kind of jobs in Ukraine. I speak a lot with my students at the age between 30 and 50 about the job perspectives in Denmark, and they sound confused and disappointed. They took several steps down on their career staircases after moving from Ukraine to Denmark, and this is unfortunately the common set destiny for foreigners who cannot speak a language of the country. The social status is changing dramatically in such circumstances. People with high education who had good jobs in Ukraine are not really happy to clean toilets in Denmark, let's say in this black way, but unfortunately, Denmark can't and sometimes will not offer them other jobs before they can speak Danish fluently. Also, formally or informally, Ukrainians and other foreigners are also in many contexts required to know a lot of written and unwritten rules regarding the Danish labor market, and it's very special. This huge dilemma has already pressed a lot of Ukrainians, at least a part of Ukrainians, out of Denmark. It is like Ukrainians have to choose between two bad things: life under the war conditions in their motherland and life in the low social status in a peaceful foreign country. It's a really difficult choice. Another important reason why some Ukrainians are going back to Ukraine is the strong wish not to lose the family connections in their motherland. Many Ukrainian women who came to Denmark have their husbands and adult children in Ukraine. Their husbands and sons, even if they are not at war, still cannot leave Ukraine, and women take a decision for family reunion again because they miss their husbands a lot, and children, of course, miss their fathers. Many Ukrainians have their parents in Ukraine who are getting older, need care. It could be a lot of different reasons. And in general, this is really a difficult dialectics. What to choose in changing circumstances, what is the best, how to put the priorities in your reality. My husband, Tonio, still works as volunteer coordinator for a club for Ukrainian refugees at a center where about 400 Ukrainians live, and he confirms that impression. Based on his conversations, I will allow to say a couple of words that he just wrote for me. He spoke a lot with the staff there, and it seems that some of the mothers simply could not longer cope with living in a small rooms with their children, without their husbands and without the children's father, and without protection for the future. How can I put it better? Without perspectives, sure perspectives in the future. Therefore, some of them have chosen to return to Ukraine, and they have chosen their reunion with the family. And it's, as I said before, it's really a difficult choice because Russia still sent their bombs and missiles all over Ukraine. For those who come from areas now occupied by Russia, return is typically not an option. And here, 2.5 years after the invasion, my husband is still at the accommodation center with many of the same children, mothers and older people who came back then in the spring of 2022. Okay, immigration is in itself is a big challenge and trial when you in many ways have to start life from the beginning, from zero. But as I said, there are often two sides of the medal in many lives process, and probably there are no ideal country for people who are forced to flee their home, to leave their country, to seek protection in another country, and it will always be two sides of immigration with pluses and minuses. And of course, there are a lot of good things, still a lot of good things that Ukrainians can be grateful for here in Denmark, and I would like to mention some of those things. I will mention at least one very, very important thing: good medical help. Especially in serious cases, like, for example, heart surgery, eye surgery, cancer treatment. I heard from my students that they are very happy for the medical treatment in Denmark in serious cases, as I said, and they would never have got that treatment of such high quality for free in Ukraine. At the same time, it is easy to destroy health at hard job. Life's dialectics. One more time. Denmark is also one of the best countries in Europe regarding help to Ukrainian teenagers and young people under 18 years who by some reasons come to Denmark without their parents. I translate sometimes to such targeted group. It is very impressive how many resources are used in such cases, but different Danish authorities to organize a good life in Denmark for those young people. They are immediately provided with everything: money, flat, furniture, mental help, help with school, support for doing sport and free time activities. It's really impressive. At the end of my report, I will mention that I continue to write anti-war literature and now prepare a book of my anti-war poems and novels selections that will be printed in Riga in January 2025. And my new anti-war poem selection was recently published in Kiev in the anthology Year of Poetry 2024. Ukrainian authors were traditionally also invited to participate for free. And we need to thank Dr. Fett for a big work he again has done to coordinate this important cultural project. Thank you, Dr. Fett. This is also one of the ways to support Ukraine spiritually. So, dear friends, I would like to finish with my poems that Dr. Fett kindly translated again. It's really great. Thank you. I'm so impressed by your big talent. I will read in Russian and Dr. Fett will read in English. I will change now. Thank you. I will change to Russian now, and then it will be the translation. But I cannot write so good in Ukrainian yet. Maybe in future I would love to, but now I will read in Russian. Все живое, все дышит, все плачет. Под снарядами жизнь набекрень. В небо синее, в ситцевом платье Украина восходит на крест. Реки крови и горя громады, пакля гнезд в обгоревших ветвях, городов, опустевших гримасы, пустота в онемевших словах. Нет людей, только смерти приманки, нет земли, лишь могила одна, поле выжжено, травы примяты, Пьется чаша безумия до дна. Солнце гаснет, и сердце остыло под бомбежкой войны и вины. И теперь обессиленно стыдно быть живой в эти черные дни.
All that's alive breathes and cries. Life is distorted under the shells. In her cotton dress to the blue skies, Ukraine ascends to the cross. Rivers of blood, mountains of grief, empty nests on the charred branches, yawning faces of murdered cities, emptiness of the numb words. There are no people, just the bait of death. There is no land, just a single grave. The field is scorched, the grass is trampled, the cup of madness is drunk to the bottom. The sun is going out, the heart has cooled under the missiles of war and guilt. It is so helplessly shameful to be alive in these dark days.
And one more. По весеннему небу войны пунктир перечеркнут крест-накрест судьбы рассказ и вступает в права незнакомый мир, где любовь невнятна, а смерть резка и близка. Дырявый, надев халат, входит в дом и в привычку, воронкой ртом ухмыляется и не отводит взгляд. Сочинений новейших листает том. А из вены вселенной струится боль матерей, убитых с издевкой впрок. Доживать без детей. Снова взрывы бомб наблюдает давно посидевший Бог. Потеряла смысл мишура забот. Бытие на багровом снегу лежит. Лишь огни пожаров, гирлянды бомб, самоцветы крови, не миражи. Каски вписаны в краски весны глухой. В нежном прошлом прячутся соловьи детских сказок. Сбивает их смерть клюкой, светок в пепел сгоревших томов любви.
All across the sky, a dotted line of war. The story of our spring is crossed out by fate. An unknown world comes into its own, where love is tongue-tied and death is sharp and available. In a ragged gown, comes inside your house. With its funnel mouth, it smirks and it does not look away, living through a volume of the latest works. Here, from the veins of the universe, flows the pain of mothers who will spend their days in living hell with their children killed. Bomb explosions are watched by the gray-haired god. Any worries are tinsel that lost its meaning. The existence lies on the crimson snow. Only real things are the lights of fires, daisy chains of bombs, and gems of blood. Helmets blend with the colors of the deaf spring. Nightingales are hiding in the children's tales of the past, and death knocks them down with a stick into the ashes of the volumes of love.
Thank you. I'm really happy for your translation. And
Thank you, Nina.
I will thank
Thank you
everyone for your attention. Thank you very much, because, you know, I wanted just to maybe update from many spheres, and it was emotional because still I take it very personally, because I love my students, I love Ukrainians in Denmark, and I really try to help them. And I'm happy that I can just send this story like about who now flies from Denmark to USA. And I really feel that there are many people who are still, who take it personally, who take it very close to the heart, what is happening, and we hope for the best. But as I said, war continues, and we need to send these supporting symbols, yes, to Ukrainians and the world. around us. I think it's important.
Thank you, Nina, so much for this wonderful and moving presentation. Before I open it to the questions and comments, I need to tell our listeners that what is not obvious to them. Denmark has a very special place in our upbringing. By our, I mean those who grew up in the Soviet Union, like Nina and myself, primarily through Hans Christian Andersen, whose tales were translated from Danish to Russian in 19th century. We learned kindness and sadness and a role of many, many things which were not very obvious in our environments. So this seems to be very perfect day between Christmas and New Year to remember this wonderful author and all his influence, which lives in our bones, from Thumbelin to Ugly Duckling to Little Mermaid, which indeed lives in not only in Europe, all over the world, but as we think Denmark, we don't immediately think Hamlet, people of our upbringing. We think Thumbelina before we think Hamlet.
That's true. That's true.
So that's very relevant, very important, and shows again the training of transcending real poetry, real literature, transcending the world, and especially in the modern interconnected world. So we wish all our listeners a victorious and healthy 2025, whatever it brings. It is one of the most unpredictable years of modern history. And with this, I give word to our constant listener, Dr. Leonard Deutsch, who is our former graduate of Marshall University. Please, Len.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to commend you for your poetry. The imagery is very powerful. The crimson snow and images like that are absolutely astonishing and very powerful. Secondly, I wanted to ask you a question. According to the 14th Amendment to our Constitution, if a child is born in the United States, no matter the citizenry status of the parents, the child automatically becomes an American or U.S. citizen. In Denmark, if a woman who is Ukrainian happens to have a baby in Denmark, does that child automatically become a Danish
Not
child?
at all. Unfortunately, not at all. Not automatically, and it's extremely difficult to get the Danish citizenship also for babies, let me say in this way. No, it's a big difference. As I mentioned before in my report, it was this legislation, really hard registration against foreigners. So it has never been in this way, and I don't think it will be in this way. So no, not at all. And
sorry to hear that.
It's not so good. I know actually it's really beautiful and romantic story, and I can maybe make a big report and tell also about some happy stories, because I have some students who met each other in Denmark and were married, and now they got a baby. At least they were my students. Now they have a little baby, but this baby has no really chance to be a Danish citizenship, not at all. So,
Okay.
no, unfortunately not.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
More comments and questions, please. Anara.
Yes, be free. I'm happy to. I like to answer questions. Actually.
I have
Yeah.
one, Dr.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to, you mentioned the characteristics of the type of individuals who are returning to Ukraine. I just wanted to verify that it's consistently the mothers with children who want to return. Is that pretty much the general characteristic of that group? Thank you.
Yes, of course. First of all, the majority of Ukrainians who came to Denmark was in beforehand mothers with children who escaped from the war, and they're returning back to their husbands. Yes, as I also mentioned, there are also some few men with some special problems and individual cases that came to Denmark. But yes, the majority is women with children. By the way, as I said, there are so many subjects, but I heard that children, Ukrainian children, they don't have so good opportunity to integrate in Danish schools because the mentality is so different. And mothers can feel that children, they don't have so good at Danish schools, and then they just take them back to Ukraine because it's not so easy to integrate in Danish society and be among Danish children. But it can be some exceptions, but yes. But answering your question, yes, the majority is mothers with children.
Anara?
Thank you very much for your amazing analysis of integration of refugees. It's extremely important, not only for your country where you are, but also for Europe, for America, and for all countries around Ukraine. I think it's extremely well done. And in sociology, we call it as an observation report. You
Thank you.
prepared very actually
I'm so
interesting
happy to see.
observation report, totally unbiased. I think you combine different approaches. I only wish it should be published somehow.
Oh,
Your
thank you.
impression, yeah, it may have impact on practical conditions. Someone may read this and change actually their approach. Also, I like very much your poems, especially philosophical aspect of sadness and horror. It's very difficult to talk about war because it's so ugly, but it's in this such a human way. Actually, it was done very well. And I just would like to ask you, what your students or people from Ukraine or Russia or anyone who are other people who face the horror of war say about your poems, because they can understand better. They can actually explain even better than people who are sitting in America and may have actually may have less visual information.
First of all, I will say thank you to you because it was so important for me to hear such good words about my report, because when I wrote it, I was a little bit in doubt. What shall I mention? There are so many points, and if you think it was well done, I'm happy for that. It's really important for me. And coming back to poems, yes, I read my poems because it's part of me. I see the world through the poesy and I express my feelings through my poetry, yes, poesy. And yes, people like it. I, of course, like a part of my personality, I present my poems and I can really get a very good feedback. So I'm happy that I can also just put my sound, yes, just to tell what I feel, not only in the form of maybe just prosa or maybe describing of things, because I can see and observe a lot of things, but then can also put it in a form of poesy. So it's positive, it's good. I read my poems, of course I do. But thank you. It's very important to get such support and such fine words, and it means a lot, because when every time you just go and you work with people, you stay and explain the Danish grammar, it's a lot of everyday work, and suddenly I have an opportunity just to put my experiences in another way. And so why this day is so important for me, that I can feel this feedback, and this is really great. Thank you.
Yeah, I like it. I perceived it in original language, and I felt music as something difficult to explain because you need to understand. It's like
Yes.
music. It's like music. It's something what artists produced, depicting on their artwork. So that's why I think it's very, very powerful. I just wish that other people can
It's
read and
important.
enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's so important for me to hear. Really.
Thank you very much, Anara. Well said. And I don't anymore in the famous saying, poetry is what is lost in translation. I think we have a way to convey at least some of it in
You're so
translation.
great.
and
You're so
animation.
great. Because
Thank
my
you.
husband, Tonio, he's fond of your translations. Is it true, Tonio? Can you say a word? He's really he's very impressed because I can also I would like to express
It
my
is definitely
feelings.
true. Yes.
Yes,
I agree.
Tony confirms because he can really feel so many nuances, so many colors of my poems through your translations, Dr. Fed. It's so great. I'm so grateful because I also want to present myself to many people, but also to my husband because he shares a lot of my interest to Ukrainian, and we are on the right side together. And so it's important that he can also read my poems in good translation. So-
And again, if I may, Tony, not only I thank you and Nina very much, but to you as a Danish man, I need to reiterate the role of Denmark in our upbringing was unexpectedly, probably many Danish people don't know this, but I grew up with Andersen's characters much more than
Me too.
with Russian fairy tales,
Yeah,
which
that's
probably
true.
are even more cruel than Andersen's. But it was
Yes.
part of our childhood upbringing. This, not even talking about Snow Queen. I tear up when I think about Snow Queen's story. It was retold for us by many authors, by playwrights. The story of a Snow Queen, for those who didn't know it in the original, knew it in Russian plays and movies and everything. And it was
Exactly.
true. It was
You're right.
true to the original, not just like Disney, movies.
No.
It was in the 50s and 60s, but all these people relied on old school translators because, well, no one knew Danish in our time. Probably Nina and a few other people.
Maybe. That's true.
So this was way before, Sweden gave us Carlson, and
Yes, Astrid
Tove
Lindgren. Yeah.
Jansson gave us Moomin Trolls, and
Yes.
this was back before
True.
that. So Andersen was delayed for us for 50 years. He was
That's
with us.
true. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's so very important for our psyche, for mentality, that even if you name minor characters of Snow Queen to anyone with Russian classical background, they will know who you are talking about.
That's right.
And that matters a lot for poetry, because that's exactly where translation works, not just translation of words, but translation of metaphors and images,
Metaphors.
which are
Yes.
shared by cultures. In other words, histories may not be that important as this type of cultural mutual, connection.
Exactly. And you're so great to metaphors. I love your poems because
Thank
you
you.
are genius in metaphors. I dream to write an article about your metaphors
Well,
because yes.
you can try to translate them into Danish. This was
Yes.
never done.
Please
It will
do.
be
Please do.
yes, it's really great because you're full of language, different levels of language, different palette of meanings. It's really impressive. So let's cooperate in many ways. In
Yes, let's make
Danish,
more
English,
podcasts about poetry and
poetry,
translations.
because
We do
we
all the
do.
time. And I
And
see that Katerina has her hand now. Yes,
okay,
Nina,
perfect.
I don't want to cut you off. Please talk as much as you want.
No,
We
I
have
just want
time.
to say that
We
it's
don't
really
have to
great.
go, but Katerina, please say a few words.
Yes, Katerina, yes.
I almost feel bad for inserting the war back into this happy, beautiful conversation. It is amazing watching two great talents begin cooperation or continue collaboration. Nina, I just want to echo what Anara and others have said. Your presentation, well, your poetry is next level, but the presentation itself reflects the same skills of someone who can use language to communicate. It's really important that you shared some statistics with us. The fact that 11,000 Ukrainians have left and returned, but more importantly, the fact that Europe has given more assistance than the USA. Even I believe you said, was it Latvia, Lithuania? Even Lithuania has contributed. Estonia, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Estonia.
The contributions. I think here in the West, in America, we don't think of this. In fact, one of the constant criticisms we hear in our political discourse is that Europe needs to step up. Europe needs to step up. When in fact, it sounds like Europe is doing plenty. And so thank you. This is very, very valuable information. So both the data side, but also the empathy side. Thank you for teaching Danish, and thank you to Tony for helping refugees. I can tell you
Yes.
that those people will remember you forever. I am the daughter of immigrants, and exactly the generations you described. My grandmother came here when she was in her mid-50s, both grandmothers in their mid-50s. Both come from comfortable lives in Ukraine and in Latvia, actually. And one grandmother cleaned floors in a hospital at my age, so that's a mid-50s hire. The other, for the first time in their lives, the other sewed collars on children's dresses in a factory. And this was hard. The hard part is the lack of language access. That is probably the most humbling and traumatic thing, not to be able to communicate, because you know you're smart, you know things, but you sound not smart when you're talking in broken bits and pieces using hand gestures to communicate. And so what you're doing by making language available is truly it's a great, thank you for using your talents for the vulnerable, the terrified, the anxious, the suffering. They will remember you. They will remember. My mother remembers to this day the person who helped her with language. They will remember you forever, and you are going to be a bright spot in an absolute horrific situation. You mentioned people don't like uncertainty, don't like trauma. I mean, sorry, from trauma, don't like uncertainty. And this has got to be so true. I think we in the United States cannot fully appreciate what it is like to live with that level of uncertainty. You mentioned that there's the Association of Ukrainians in Denmark. That's interesting too, how patterns repeat themselves. When the immigration first came to America, Ukrainians came to America after World War II. Exactly what they started: the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, the Ukrainian American Committee, like to create little pockets of familiarity. And I do remember as a child running into someone who spoke Ukrainian, and how the look of relief on my grandmother's faces. So my grandmothers came here in their mid to late 50s. My parents came here as teenagers, and then I was born here. So as you describe these experiences, I think it really is an amazing glimpse into the experience of refugees everywhere, and to have this real time just accounting of what their experience is like. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that just as I have a great life right now, and I hope that for the children of the people you are teaching, that it does change and become better in whatever way that looks, be it in our suffering Ukraine that's been rebuilt, be it somewhere else. But my main point is, I just want to just thank you for using your power, your talents, to help people who are in absolutely impossible circumstances. You are making the world bearable for them, and I'm
Thank
very,
you.
very grateful.
Thank you for your words. It's so important for me, and I really try my best to help my Ukrainian students, to help Ukrainian in Denmark. And I will also say thank you to my husband, because he helped me also a lot with information, with statistics, and we prepared this presentation together. And I'm really happy that I have a great Danish family who's on the right side, you know.
Thank you.
And we try our best We try our best. And thank you for your words, for your attention, for your support, spiritual support, you can say. I can say in this way, it's important for me. It's worth to continue. It just give me power to continue. So it's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nina.
Thank you.
We might have more questions from our viewers. I see even my old friend,
Okay.
Khan, joining from Kyiv right now. If he is
Great.
not shy to ask, he was here a moment ago. Maybe he's not active, but we do have several people. I hope we will be watched a lot in recording, and we're about to end our recording. We can stay for a few moments after that. Oh, here is Sergey. Sergey, you want to say Mangetak to Nina?
Mangetak.
Or maybe something more Danish oriented.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for your report, and for your poetry. And I have a tiny question. We've heard here about the difficulty of Danish language, especially its phonetics.
Exactly.
And you've said about the difficulty of difference in mentalities of children. And how do you think, what is more difficult, difference in phonetics or difference in mentality?
Both.
Both.
I cannot separate such things. If we talk about children, I heard from my students that when their children goes to school, they can feel that it's a little bit like a war between them and Danish children. Ukrainian children are maybe more open and they want to share things. They want to play together. And Danish children, at least at schools, I will not maybe talk about the whole Denmark because I love Denmark, but it's just like they keep in small groups, Danish children. And Ukrainian children then want just to show the interest all around, and they want to play with everyone. And so why it's difficult for them to understand that they are very reserved and they don't take them inside the community sometimes. And it's painful for them and for Ukrainian children, I mean. And regarding the language, yes, it's extremely difficult with pronunciation, and many, I translate a lot for mothers and children, Ukrainian mothers and children, and many Ukrainian children, they can understand a lot of Danish, but they don't dare to speak because they're so much afraid to pronounce in wrong way. And then Danish children will just look on them, it's not so good. So always in connection, I think the language is also very important.
And one more very little remark, maybe more to Victor than to you. Victor, you've forgotten one more famous name, which was with us not in 60s, but in 70s.
Okay.
I mean, Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard, of course.
Never read that one. Never read that one.
It's horrible. I tried to
but
read him in Danish.
But his portrait was in our theater.
Yeah, we had his portrait in our theater, just in the face of the authorities. But I can't say I ever read him.
It's really difficult. I tried to read him in Danish, and I understand words, but I cannot really catch the meaning sometimes. And he's special, but he's existentialist. What is it in English? Existentialist? How you translate it in English? Existential.
Essentially, okay.
But he was very much concentrated in this inside world and how the person just reflect the world around and what is the first place, what is the second. He was like that, but it is extremely difficult to read him, And what about Niels Bohr? What about Niels Bohr?
Yes, Niels Bohr, of
Niels
course.
Bohr, of course. So
yes.
there are some famous people, and
we knew many names, yeah. Any more questions, please? Sergey, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you,
very,
Sergey.
very
That's
good
really good.
question.
That's good.
If somebody wants to ask more, we have time. I have to hold myself not to ask more about literature
Just ask
and
if-
poetry. We can do it some other time, but again, it's a perfect New Year topic, and
Yes, it's a good topic. You're right.
move of hope for us
That's
on
true.
the other
That's
side.
true.
On the other side of the Atlantic, without even mentioning Leif Erikson and other guys of the old times. Okay, Dr. Shrey, if we have no more questions, Tony, you want to say a few words? No? Dr. Shrey, Katerina, please.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні. Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, в цей точний час ми зберігаємо вас у наших думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні.
Героям слава. Thank you. Дякую.
Thank you, Nina. Дякую.
Дякую.